Hi, guys. Following a very interesting interview that we had with Matic Network, I have with me Jack today, who's the CEO of Scale Labs, which is also trying to solve the problem of scalability on Ethereum. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So in one of the blog posts that your company's posted, you talk about the evolution of how enterprise software has evolved from it being on premises to in the cloud and now open source. And so from the perspective of crypto, how much of the business moat comes from things like packaging and marketing and community? And we've already seen multiple examples of this where some of the protocols do much better because of the way that, because of how involved the community is, or because of the moat that they've built through marketing. Could you give us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, great question. So I've been doing enterprise software for 13 years. Started actually in a semi on-prem cloud hybrid company that sold to Motorola for 500 million. It was a cryptographic secure messaging platform for the enterprise called Good Technology. I then started a digital currency platform for the enterprise where enterprises could tokenize scarce resources, and the price would fluctuate based off supply and demand, and did that in 2008. Really got excited about digital currency, and but did that also right before the market crashed. And anyways, ended up folding that into an enterprise software startup that grew, and the majority of the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical and biotech companies around the world use this to optimize their enterprise resources and their sales and marketing efforts. So that company is called Octana. So have a long history in seeing the enterprise evolve and eventually moving into a pure cloud model, and also had an opportunity to see the way IT organizations made buying decisions and the way finance like to buy software. And what I've seen now, and kind of my view and why I'm here living in this world of crypto and decentralized systems, is I think the next big play, as we've seen open source really come to the forefront. And open source is still, let's be honest, is just getting started, right? Cloud is dominating, but open source cloud and B2D platforms are really starting to take off. And there's a lot of chatter. You go to any coffee shop in San Francisco, you'll probably hear you'll overhear a conversation about that. And the reason is it's community. Community is your asset. You have to give up your code, and in return, you get community. You get not just people helping and supporting and contributing, but your customers get to touch and feel and see what they're buying. And then the value is not just writing the code, it's the way you package the code and the way you host it for them. Still, no one wants to host your open source code on their internal servers. So we still have a cloud model, but it's with an open source effort. So that has been interesting to see happen, and that's just getting started. The next evolution on that, which is really exciting, is one of the issues with open source software is driving network effects and getting motivated contributors. And you're still reliant on centralized systems. You have to pay companies to run your servers. In this P2P open world we're living in, the opportunity to drive network effects is so much greater. And that is exciting. That's what's exciting to me about crypto, and then the evolution on top of open source. So this is these things. The other thing is, I think everyone gets really anxious and excited, and they expect it to happen overnight. These things take a long time. Okay, like these are 10-year processes to really get huge headwind. And that's just what it takes to not only just start a big, prominent platform or business or project, but to really see adoption take place. So we're just still in the early stages, and I think the next couple of years are going to be pretty exciting.
Right. So, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And I think, I don't know if you want to get into that, but I think there's been a huge discussion about how, I saw this tweet about how meme is law, and how the meme culture actually drives communities today and actually drives traffic on the internet. And so I think that becomes super important in developing the community and also getting awareness of particular projects or companies out there. But what I want to ask is, you make a point of um, how AWS it going down, and even if it's just for a couple of minutes, how that's totally unacceptable, especially in today's context and in the future where we might have things like autonomous cars dependent on things like AWS, including some of the very other vital things. Could you explain a little bit about, or talk a little bit about how the role that blockchain technology plays as far as uptime is concerned?
Yeah, that's a good. I think Stan Kladko, Scale CTO and my co-founder, loves to talk about the unstoppable nature of blockchains, and really, what you're getting at is the concept of thinking of blockchains really as backend databases. So instead of having one instance, you're running an entire set of them. If they're Byzantine fault tolerant, as long as 2/3 of them are operating, the system keeps running, right? So they are unstoppable databases, assuming there's the right incentive structures and security measures and strength within the code. They are unstoppable. And I do think we're going to see, especially in systems like Scale, where we have a network of side chains, and we are building what we call elastic side chains. I think with the industry, a lot of people are starting to call elastic side chains, where we're able to not just provide a server to a chain, but provide a component of a server. So because of also what we see happening with containerization, with microservices, we're able to take a server and make that a lot more than just one server. And in Scale, one node could be on 128 chains at full capacity if you're at the smallest level. Or if someone wants more resources, maybe that server gets devoted in a 1-to-1 ratio, and all the containers work as one unit to support a larger chain. So what I'm getting at is, what I think we're going to see with these elastic sidechain models is you're going to see them performing more as database structures, and you're going to be seeing the browsers performing more heavy work and maybe heavy lifting, and the back end is going to be more about simple calls, storage, and security. And you'll see more action happening in the browser as we see that evolve from the perspective of how people use DApps. So I do think uptime's important. Even more important, though, I think there's benefits to being able to run a truly decentralized peer-to-peer system and decentralized application that are business-oriented and actually allow people as entrepreneurs to bring a new advantage to the playing field, other than just uptime, which uptime is also really valuable.
Right. So you mentioned a couple of concepts. Elastic sidechain is one of them. Network of sidechains is another. And I want to get into both those concepts, but I want to talk about just Ethereum scalability in general first. So there's multiple layer 1 and layer 2 solutions that are in progress at the moment. There's multiple entrepreneurs trying to work on these problems. And so, on the layer 2 side, you've got Plasma and sidechains on one side and the payment channels on another. You've chosen to go down the sidechain path. Could you talk a little bit about your motivations to go down this path? I mean, was that from personal experience? Is there any particular reason why you've chosen to work on this particular problem?
Yeah, so I have kind of a career of living in this middleware zone of software and being connected as a part of the system. So when I met Stan, he was actually working on his own on a DEX. He also had idea for a Twitter payments payments platform, and 3 or 4 other ideas, and he was excited about doing all of them. And I said, why do you think you can do 5 different things? And I listened to him and I said, okay, well, show me technically how you think this all works. And realized that what he was designing was what I saw as middleware, which is today what we see as elastic sidechains. And he was thinking of bringing that to market with a DEX. And we realized together that, wow, this is something we could bring to the market and bring it to many decentralized finance applications, many consumer internet disruptor DApps, many games. And that was the genesis of how that came about. Now, sidechains, and frankly, that was the model he saw that solved his problem the best when he was designing what he wanted from decentralized exchange perspective. What is interesting about all of these models is they have different strengths and weaknesses. So side chains, we like side chains because we think they're by far, they bring the best user experience. They by far bring the best, and that's for the developer, that's for the end user. The end user doesn't even need to know they're using a side chain. The developer could deploy to scale in less than 1 minute. You can run full state smart contracts with very little additional effort. And essentially EVM in our system runs on the sidechain. So what you have is just a mini version and many versions or even bigger versions of Ethereum that also have obviously changes so that, in Scale you could run 2,000 smart contracts per second. But conversely, when you have greater user experience, you also have greater risk. So it's incredibly important for the Scale network and any sidechain network to have great incentives for validators in terms of staking, in terms of slashing, in terms of rewards, in terms of seeding the network initially with people who have strong interest towards the network success and money in the system. And you also need to be smart as a developer. On day one of a new sidechain network launching, you shouldn't put $1 million homes on the sidechain, right? We're going to see small transactions. We're going to see settlement happening with more regularity, so people aren't leaving such vast amounts on the sidechain for too long. And over time, as these sidechain networks get stronger, you're going to see that people start trusting them more like they've trusted Ethereum. Now, some of these other methods have, tighter restrictions and harder implementation from user experience perspective for users and end users, but they have more built-in security guarantees. So they give up functionality for security. And in a sidechain network, security is still paramount, but people will see people take more and more time before they put hugely expensive assets on sidechains. And even then, the sidechains are meant to work in tandem with the layer one, which frankly, I think we're going to grow out of the term layer one and layer two very soon, especially as we start seeing elastic sidechain networks really just being other blockchains. And what we're going to have is a lot of blockchains, and some of them are going to be good at execution or activity, and other ones are going to be really good at securing assets. So we'll have security layers, we'll have action layers, and I think we're also going to see state channels and plasma implementations also be a part of this mix based off of needs and requirements. So it'll be really interesting to see this develop. And we're talking to developers every day, and we're happy about the model we have. It works for our partners. So, but all of these things I think are viable assets to the ecosystem.
Yep. Yeah, I like the fact that you talk about the actual interaction of the side chains with the main chain, and how the main chain and the side chain offer differing levels of security. And so I guess an application can kind of decide, depending on the kind of transactions it's doing, what level of security it needs and where settlement takes place. How long do assets stay on the side chain versus settling on the main chain? You mentioned a couple of other things. So one was a network of side chains, and the other thing was an elastic side chain. Could you talk a little bit about what do you mean actually by a network of side chains? And again, and within that context, what does elasticity mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so great question. So let's say in the Scale network, let's say there's 1,000 nodes in that network, okay? In that network, let's say I'm a developer and I come to deploy my sidechain, and I take my Ethereum smart contract that I want to run in the sidechain. In less than a minute, I can get it up on in my sidechain. Now, how do I get those servers? How does that network determine who works for me? And do I just get 16 servers? What happens if one goes down? Now, the thing with elastic sidechains and a network of sidechains is that there's randomization and an algorithm that determines which nodes work for me. And then it also rotates the nodes that work for me so as to prevent collusion. And it also tries to obfuscate from the nodes so that they don't understand and know who they're working for. Now, we have to assume that they are going to be able to just figure out what chains they're on. We have to rotate them and have the right incentive structure so they don't want to collude. and have the right penalties if they do. But what essentially happens, and what we do at Scale, we use threshold signatures. We use BLS threshold signatures to do random number generation to determine the entropy of which nodes or subsection of a node, or what we call virtualized subnodes, work for that chain. Now, that therein, I think, brings up the topic of elasticity. So as I've been doing enterprise software in my career, enterprise clients, and I say this, we are building, like, this just means any high performant company, project, game, etc. These people running systems expect to be able to configure systems to their liking, okay? So if I want to deploy on Amazon today, if I want to deploy on Google Cloud, if I want to deploy in any of these cloud instances, I can determine how much I want, and I can determine all of these flavors and components and colors that match my requirements. Crypto right now is one size fits all. Everybody just shares it. And guess what? In 5 years, that's not going to be the case. People, even now, like, we're giving people the opportunity to show up and say, this is how many nodes I want. This is how much space within each node I want. And this is what my budget is. And if I have a low budget and low need for my chain, I might get the smallest chain, which is 1/128th of 16 random selected virtualized subnodes. Or I may say I want entire nodes and I want a lot of them. And the other piece of this that's interesting is it's not just configuration on space. You also can determine in an elastic sidechain model what features you want. So storage is an interesting feature. You're going to see some big announcements, if you haven't already, on Scale storage. So if we can think of this node as having many different little Linux boxes or containers in them, and each one of them is essentially its own computer, we can also leverage those for storage. And so what we've done at Scale is we've been able to extend EVM so that we can make calls upon these containers and help people leverage storage right within the sidechain. So there's no need now to run IPFS for many use cases. In some use cases, great, IPFS would be good. But for many of them, we're finding developers just want to leverage the sidechain, and there you go. Then you have your storage, it's on-chain, and it's all accessible within the subnodes that you can extend EVM to. So that's the quick, dirty summary of a network of nodes that rotates and randomly works for a DApp, and the way that not even an entire server, but a subcomponent of a server can work for a DApp. And that's really where we get elasticity, configurability, modularity, and within a network of sidechains.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview of, I think, your entire network as well. And again, I think the key component or the key message, key takeaway there is that things are customizable depending on the use case, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think this is one of the last few technical questions. I don't want to bore the audience too much as well. So one of the last technical questions that I want to ask is around the consensus mechanism. Could you talk a little bit more about what that is for each of these side chains, or S chains as you call them?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So we think of even consensus as a component of configuration. So at the start, there's only one consensus model you can use, and it's a Scale consensus, and it's a leaderless BFT, and we didn't invent any math proofs. We've really worked off of this lineage of Honey Badger, Red Belly, and then some great work by Mustafi and Reynal, and that group with a binary consensus. So what we have with Scale is a leaderless binary consensus, and it's very fast. Not when outside of EVM, it does 20,000 transactions per second. Inside of EVM, it gets throttled down to 2,000, and that's across 16 full Scale nodes. So it's really fast, but we understand that maybe our customers at some point, for different reasons, are going to want different types of consensus. And someone might want to use a Tendermint. Someone might want to use a different model of consensus. So in the future, you'll even be able, as you deploy your Scale chain, to select the consensus that works for your requirements. So we think of the Scale network as being a true configurable modular system. We also at some point we want to implement Plasma, and so I could say, actually, I want to implement a Plasma operator here as connected to my chain, and other features. So the thing is, you have to start from day one with a modular configurable build. It's hard to build something and then say, oh, I want to help my users swap this out or that out. The system will break. So from day one, we've been building that model, and that's because we have a team that I think is a really nice mix of crypto experts and enthusiasts and enterprise software people who have really seen the way to build software systems that are usable and configurable.
Right. So I want to pick on that word, usable. And I know a lot of scalability projects talk about not just scalability, but usability as well. Also to get to a stage where not only early adopters are using it, but it does get sort of more mainstream usage and adoption. Could you talk a little bit more about your efforts to make things more usable and more user-friendly? I think we've talked from a developer perspective about how they can kind of adapt and how things are customizable within the Scale network, customizable depending on the use case, but more from a user perspective, like how does that impact the user? Or is there anything that you're doing at the network level to make it more user-friendly for the final end user?
Yeah, really, really great question. So I like to say scalability is equally a user experience problem as it is a technology problem. If we create just something that's faster, but it's not usable, we're not going to see any growth. We're not going to get over 10,000 users a month on DAppRadar. And the reality is to be relevant, and hey, by the way, this stuff takes a while. It's going to take a while. And what happens is it builds slow and then it happens really fast. But to get to that compounding growth where we hit this like knee of the curve, we're going to need far greater usability. And one thing I like to see, a lot of the very cool projects we're working with have blockchain really almost as a behind the scene things for users. Okay. And some it's upfront and obviously a core part of the business, but even those are making great strides towards usability. So what that means to us and what that means from a sidechain perspective is, for us, the end user never needs to know they're even interacting on a sidechain. So what they do is they use the system, and then what we do is we connect the Web3 connector. So that essentially there's a data point from the browser that from Web3 that Ethereum gets, and we make sure that the sidechain gets the exact same data point at the same time. So you connect it to both places, and then what you need to do is you need to freeze those ERC 721s or ERC 20s or ETH or whatever it is coming through. And we even plan to do this for Bitcoin. Somebody could build a DApp and have it Bitcoin freeze, and then we can help them leverage EVM with Bitcoin. So, but let's go back to like an ERC20. So on one side, it's going here and it's just getting stuck. And the other side, it's going through and it's running and consensus is happening. And this is all happening in the sidechain. What's happening on the sidechain then are effectively clones. So the user only is using one currency that's locked. And then every time I put an Ether in, then guess what? A clone is created on the sidechain and it runs. And if I spend it and I want it back, guess what? That ledger is keeping track of it. And when I want my money back, it makes sure it's accurate and it burns the clone and releases the attributed money back to me that I have when I want it, assuming that it would obviously the ledger would be accurate, and then it would update the main chain and the money would come back to me. So in that model, the user never knows, there's never a delay, and they don't need to have a special wallet. They don't need to fund a special wallet. They don't need to rely on the DApps to have integrations with their special wallet for that channel or generalized state channel, whatever it might be. And then for the developer, literally it takes a minute once they, let's say I get access, I set up maybe it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes to set up my Scale chain. Once I have it, I just update a few settings and it's as easy as deploying to an Ethereum testnet. So we think the developer, it needs to be easy for them. And most importantly, we can't add more complexity to the end user. We need to get 100,000 users a month and then we need to get 50% month-over-month growth. Okay, look how many people use Supercell games, right? That's the level of traction we need within this space.
Yep. So speaking of traction, let's talk about some of the dApps that are building on your network.
Yeah. So we've taken an interesting approach where we've launched what's called the Scale Innovator program. And we're firm believers in customer development methodology. So Steve Blank was an investor in the first company I started. And as 4 Steps to Epiphany is a really great book for anyone out there wanting to learn more. It's one of the, I think, classics of product development and customer development. And so instead of just trying to sign up 100 customers or users, we've done 2 waves of 5 DApps, and we work with them. They beat up the product. They tell us what they want. We go back and build the features, and it's just old-fashioned Silicon Valley customer development. So we've got 10 really amazing DApps in this program, and it's a mix of games. It's a mix of decentralized finance and consumer internet disruptors and music disruptors. So we're seeing a nice mix in those categories, and we're excited to open it up. We're doing another cohort here in May, end of May, and it will be very focused on storage. So if anybody wants to run and test the Scale chain, and especially if you want to leverage storage, we'd love to talk. And then even more excited to just open it up to anybody and everyone. But hey, right now there's a really great group of people that are beating it up, and they're giving us phenomenal feedback, and we're building that into the product.
It's funny how you mentioned Silicon Valley style banging out companies. So you're on the Decrypt Asia podcast. I want to know about your plans for Asia.
Yeah. So I spent 500 days in Japan over 7 years, not too long ago. Spent a lot of time in China and have spent a lot of time in Asia on business. So really, really appreciate that market. And one thing I've seen is, a lot of these Silicon Valley methodologies, I've seen them grow out and seen amazing companies apply and even innovate and take those on into their own markets, especially in Singapore, Indonesia, Japan, China. Really, really amazing things happening in Asia, and I'll be spending a lot of time there again. And used to spend 10 days a month in Asia for about 7 years. So right. love the market.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to kind of get your views on the competitive landscape. So there's a few projects that are now working on scalability projects, specifically on the sidechain / plasma chain. In that context, could you talk a little bit about how your value proposition is a little bit different from theirs? And if any entrepreneurs looking to kind of build on one of these sidechain projects, why should they pick yours over some of the others that exist today?
Yeah, great question. So what I would say is that a lot of it depends on your use cases. So like I said earlier, if you're building a car sales DApp where you sell $50,000 cars, like, don't use Scale. If you're doing something and you need a lot of throughput and you need fast block time, so on Scale you can actually have sub-second block times. So that is a huge value when you have a lot of interactivity and you need finality fast because there's interaction. And storage being integrated is also a huge asset. But so that's where we really, really are seeing a lot of success, is people that have a lot of small transactions and people that need to leverage smart contracts. Right now, we have Ethereum support. We'll potentially support other chains. It just depends on where our customers drive us. We're customer focused, and we let our customers drive our requirements. So, and then what I would say though at a high level is, right now I've got a glass of water. It's like everyone's fighting over this amount here, and over there's an entire ocean of potential business opportunities. So I like to think of our competitors as also helping drive the mission forward. And, we're just focused on building great experiences. And I wish them the best of luck too. And if we can create more and more success, then guess what? We won't have to fight over a little piece. We'll be all swimming in a big, big, nice warm ocean. But we have to make success for our partners on the DApp side.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to end the interview on, Jack. Thanks a lot for taking the time to come speak on this podcast.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.